You are watching Xirtus.
like Austrian cultural program where you have, random reporters going around and interviewing random individuals wherever they find them about whatever topic. And this actually relates also to the ongoing series we kind of both have with David, where it's a lot, of course, about the whole immigration issue and all of this. So the title of this episode is literally called "The Arabs Are Coming." Yeah. So it's about this recurring issue or question about the cultural compatibility or not, or how locals are reacting to it. And these are, as you can see here, usually nice to watch because you have like, I'm not sure how you would properly call it, the attempt to like film real individuals. So here I would actually assume that most interviews you have are not done by crisis actors or staged, but of course still, however, they are, heavily edited and selected, of course. But yeah, and this is, of course, now for a few years since 2015, a big thing also in Austria, where they started importing not only individuals from, let's say, the former Ottoman Empire, but now going up to Syria and so forth. And even back then, when you had the guest workers coming from Turkey, there was already the question, well, apparently, obviously, the Austrians, if they would be complaining about cultural incompatibility or whatever, most oftentimes the ones they're getting is maybe some farmer from the mountains or whatever, but not the educated individual from Istanbul. So even here then, also in terms of how they exercise their religion or culture, is the question whether they are actually representative of the majority, or however else you would say it, of their home country, for example, Turkey, or maybe even in the case of Syria, where I don't know so much about it. So
Well,
yeah,
I mean, I
this
think
is
this is one of those things where it's a bummer what we define as the culture of a people, and I feel like you would
of course,
agree in
which
a
is
hundred.
retarded anyways, because
Yeah,
how
but
can you
like
generalize?
in 100 years or in 15, who knows? Austria is going to be so filled with, as this article says, Arabers, right? That there's going to be a lot more question about what Arabic or Austrian culture means. And at the time, maybe 1,000 years ago in Persia, they were you can see exactly what's happening today happened in Persia. Hyper um, progressive, liberal. In ancient Persia, it was super liberal. Women had rights, women had jobs, right? This is not a place full
Well,
of
let's not talk
this.
about ancient Persia. Let's talk about Persia 40 years ago. When was it?
No, but
Iran?
yeah, but that's a good point too. But let's get to that later. I think we should start with where it was because the reason it matters is that originally Persia was so freaking based that they were so freaking tolerant that they imported Christian idiots who worship the Pope's feces in jars for their own amusement, that they also eventually allowed Islam into their country. And Islam is not Arabic culture. I am sorry. It's its own different thing. It's a new thing, and I don't want to pretend that this tractate written by a dictator is the same thing as a multi-religious. You have to think of the difference of something written by hundreds of wisdom-seeking philosophers, and sometimes by military generals. As a religion. Instead, this is like Mao's little red book that we're saying this is all of Arabic culture. That's the only limit where I say no. I won't allow it to be all of Arabic culture. That's crazy. And we can maybe say that's me making not enough of a distinction what an Islamicist is from Islam itself. But the difference between what peace and submission is, to me, are great, right? And so it's just that there's a reason why I would argue that point. However, that's also how it destroyed itself by importing Islam. I can see the same thing happening in the West when we say eventually, oh, well, this is what the West is like. And so when Westerners come to other places, then people say, oh, well, look at how wicked the wicked West, the wicked witches of the West are. So we should be very careful on that level. But
Agreed.
okay. All right. What about Weltkrieg?
So yeah, and just to point it out, as far as I know, because you saw there the fully clothed, either you could say they look like a ninja, or always the question, where do they even have this idea from with the hijab, and what is the extended version, the full body black garb. Anyways, just to point out, that's not necessarily in the Quran, even so. Religion is a political thing most often. So what we have here, I brought, I'm about to say her up before. So this is
Well,
the individual on
hold
the
on.
left.
Just because you say that, sorry, there's like ping, but just because you say that, this is
Yes.
an article that is only available in Germany. I noticed that you can't type Dar al-Harb into an American English Wikipedia page and get this word unless it's like something that's like included, but they don't have a description of what this is. But really, there's sort of this Dar al-Islam, which is the house of submission, the territory of submission, where you're in peace because you're doing what you're told. And then there's the Dar al-Harb, which is house of war, which I will translate as the area of freedom, because this is where you're constantly at war against anything that would force you to submit, right? And so this is kind of that binary that, yeah, this is the difference is Dar al obey Islam, or Dar al Harb, war against obeying, be free, fight and be free until you die. And so this is interesting because when they talk about the difference between cultures, that's a huge deal. That is essentially, and they're saying that anyone who believes in the house of war should be destroyed, and anyone who's not willing to submit to the house of Islam, of submission, anyone who's not part of submission does not deserve peace. I think that's
But even
a
here
pretty
isn't the big
important
question, as always, submission to what Lord, submission to what authority? Is it like submission to my, highest conscience and empathy and all of that? Or is it submission to whatever worldly authority or
Yeah, I think
ego,
I think in general,
ego mind
submission,
control?
we should be really careful about that idea because submission to a lord is dangerous. And this idea of the Lord being your master, well, what has he done for me lately? Like this idea that this is some sort of a benevolent dictator is a presumption based on an opposition to Zeus, right? Because if you look at the idea of a Neoplatonic God as this all truthful God, it's a paradox because a God that's all powerful cannot only be all truthful. An all potent God that's omnipresent and doing all things has to also be wicked. So we're only presupposing that this God is not wicked because that sounds better than the original God, the God that they. Hold on. That sounds better than the original God that was raping and pillaging women as swans. You know, like the original God murders you, eats you, has sex with you, and his wife is upset about it because he's always doing that. Like the God is this cruel, wicked thing. So, do you want that, or do you want the Titans that are warring with the gods? And the Titans, that's like the Promethean thing that's saying you want to be free, and this is the war against any sort of submission to
But
the
even
gods.
here, I think again is the question: do I want to be free of my own conscience, or do I want to be free of worldly authorities faked up like the Pope? I think it's still the same question has to be asked yet again in terms of
Maybe.
what is the attitude, because freedom from, yes, but again, freedom from what? And it definitely seems certain individuals are looking for freedom from consequences, freedom from their conscience and all of that, whereas others, which I think is more interesting, are really looking for freedom from domination, let's say.